In the Nazi Bible, Mein Kampf, Hitler has nothing but good to say of his friend Rudolf Hess. He even appointed him Deputy Führer and leader of the Nazi Party.
Adolf Hitler was said to have been driven to the edge of a heart attack when his most trusted second-in-command, Rudolf Hess.
Rudolf Hess has been a leading figure in the Nazi Party since the 1920s. He's been Hitler's personal secretary throughout all of that period.
Flew alone into the skies above Britain on a mission no one could explain. For decades, governments buried the truth beneath sealed files and stories that cast Hess as a man who had lost his mind.
So here was a man who was a big part of the Nazi machine, very well known, very famous throughout Germany.
But in 2025, the truth was finally revealed, and the world discovered a purpose behind his flight that was more astonishing and terrifying than anyone had imagined. The flight that made no sense. The story of Rudolf Hess begins like a moment pulled straight out of a nightmare. It feels like a scene that was never meant to happen in the real world, yet it happened during one of the most violent stages of the Second World War. On the night of May 10, 1941, while the world trembled under bombings, invasions, and constant fear, one of Nazi Germany's most powerful men climbed into a fighter aircraft and somehow managed to fly all the way to Britain, Nazi Germany's most hated enemy. This was not a minor figure. He was Adolf Hitler's deputy and had once been the closest follower Hitler had. His sudden disappearance cut through Germany like a shockwave. It stunned the British as well, because no one could understand why such a high-ranking man would make such a reckless and terrifying choice in the middle of a brutal war. The story that was later offered to the public tried to calm the confusion. It claimed that Hess had lost his sanity and that his mind had finally collapsed under pressure. That explanation was repeated over and over again. It sounded simple and safe. It allowed governments and historians to avoid the harder and more frightening possibility that Hess had acted with intention. Yet the earliest investigators quickly found details that made the official story look weak. They discovered that Hess's aircraft carried extended fuel tanks designed for long-distance flying. They found special tools for navigation. These were not random items. They were the kind of tools someone would prepare very carefully. They also found signs that he had practiced the flight path before the actual trip. They saw that he had chosen his timing and altitude with care. These details did not match the idea of a man who acted on impulse. They pointed to preparation, planning, and a mission that he believed could succeed. Understanding what was happening in Europe at the time makes the picture even more disturbing. Germany had already crushed multiple nations. Britain was still fighting after surviving months of deadly air raids. Hitler believed he was very close to breaking British resistance. For Hess to leave Germany during such a dangerous moment made no sense unless something powerful was pushing him to take that risk. The reaction inside Germany showed how serious it was. People close to Hitler said he exploded with rage. They described him pacing in fury, shouting that Hess had betrayed him in front of the world. Some recalled that Hitler was so shaken and humiliated that he appeared close to a complete physical collapse. These reports made it clear that the flight had not been approved. It had struck the center of the Nazi leadership like a violent blow. What happened after Hess reached Britain felt even stranger. He parachuted into enemy territory and was captured. Instead of being displayed as a major victory, he was hidden away in silence. The British government refused to release information for weeks. They did not share what he said or who he asked for. This silence created an atmosphere filled with suspicion. Many people wondered if Hess had expected someone to meet him. The secrecy suggested that his arrival had created fear inside the British government. It did not look like the normal behavior of a nation eager for propaganda. It looked like the behavior of a nation that had suddenly received something dangerous. Years later, many historians argued that the silence was simply a normal wartime precaution. They said that Britain did not want to reveal information that Germany could use. But investigators who studied the situation as it unfolded did not accept this explanation. They believed the government was hiding something that went beyond military security. They felt that the silence suggested that Hess may have expected contact with people in Britain who did not want to be named. This raised questions no one wanted to address publicly. It forced people to consider whether private messages or hidden discussions had taken place long before Hess ever took off. All of these contradictions deepened the mystery. Hess risked his life and his power to reach Britain. He would not have taken such a risk unless he believed it could work. That belief implies that he thought someone on the British side was waiting. These early details pulled researchers into a long and unsettling trail, and the more they followed it, the darker it became. Evidence began to point toward quiet conversations that were never meant to be seen. It suggested the presence of hidden networks inside Britain that operated outside the official government. These networks involved individuals whose roles in the war were far more complicated than they appeared on the surface. This is the point where the mystery turns even darker and more troubling. What began as an odd flight soon revealed hints of conversations and contacts hidden behind locked doors that pointed toward unexpected British figures and private networks whose role in the war was far from simple. A meeting Britain pretended never happened. When Hess landed on British soil after his terrifying flight, the first name he asked for did not belong to a military officer or a government leader. He asked for the Duke of Hamilton. This shocked the officials who heard it. It was a name no one expected to come from the mouth of Hitler's deputy.
Rudolf Hess, the Führer's deputy. That's him furthest away from the camera. He was usually to be found near to Hitler at all the big Nazi rallies.
Hess had met the Duke only briefly years earlier during a public event. Despite the short encounter, Hess spoke as if the Duke was a crucial contact. This strange request set off alarm inside the handful of British officials who were allowed to hear it. They understood that Hess would only ask for someone he believed could help him carry out a serious mission. British records confirmed that the Duke of Hamilton did go to meet Hess shortly after his capture. Official summaries later claimed that the meeting was short and unimportant. They said it was nothing more than a polite conversation. Yet witnesses who were present inside the castle where Hess was kept told a very different story. They described Hess speaking with confidence and calmness. They recalled him talking about possible peace terms and the future of the war. They remembered the Duke listening in a serious manner, not in the casual way official records later suggested. These accounts made the situation far more disturbing because they hinted that Hess believed the Duke had real influence inside the British system. This created a heavy problem for Winston Churchill. If Hess truly thought the Duke could influence British policy, it meant something unthinkable. It meant that people inside the upper class of British society might have been talking to German contacts before the war. These contacts could have been hopeful individuals who believed Germany and Britain could avoid conflict. They also could have been quiet supporters of Germany. Either possibility carried enormous danger. If such information became public, trust in the government and the aristocracy could collapse in a single blow. Churchill knew that the population was already stressed by air raids, shortages, and fear. He understood that any hint of hidden sympathy with Germany inside British high society could tear the country apart. So Churchill chose secrecy as his shield. Hess was moved in quiet steps. Only a limited number of people were allowed near him. Interrogations were tightly controlled. Files connected to Hess were locked away with more force than usual. Silence became the government's main defense. Churchill did not want the public or foreign powers to know anything about Hess's requests or conversations. He understood that even one leaked detail could ignite suspicion and panic. Despite these efforts, small traces of deeper conversations slipped into the records. Some government memos made vague references to something called Operation Alpha. They did not explain what the operation involved. They only hinted that there had been discussions that did not follow normal channels. Churchill's own letters mentioned what he called serious indiscretions that could not be exposed. These statements did not prove anything directly, yet their presence suggested that Britain was trying to cover more than routine war information. They hinted at a network of private discussions that the government wanted buried. Researchers who later examined this period felt an instant tension. They sensed that Hess had stepped into a dangerous political landscape. It was a landscape filled with people who operated outside official government structures.
Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess watched his own power within the Nazi Party disintegrate. If he could strike a peace deal with Britain, he would win back Hitler's favor.
It involved individuals from the highest levels of society whose views and activities were more complicated than they appeared in public. And the more that researchers examined this period, the more they sensed that Hess had walked into a political minefield that stretched far beyond the war cabinet. And as we look next into the aristocratic world surrounding these figures, the atmosphere becomes even more uneasy. The aristocrats who whispered in the dark. In the years leading up to the war and during its early phase, parts of Britain's upper class lived in a world filled with political confusion and fear. Europe was changing at a frightening pace. Germany was rising quickly under Hitler's rule. The Soviet Union was growing in power. The memory of World War I still haunted every family. Many people were terrified that another massive conflict would destroy their country all over again. Inside this tense atmosphere, some members of Britain's aristocracy began forming opinions that would later appear disturbing. They looked at Germany's rise and told themselves that Hitler might act as a shield against the spread of Soviet power. Others admired the strict order they saw in Germany. Some believed that Germany and Britain were destined to avoid war because both nations were powerful and influential. They hoped that a negotiated deal between the two countries could spare Britain terrible suffering. Diaries, letters, and private notes that came out decades later revealed behavior that seemed harmless at the time, yet dangerous in hindsight. Certain aristocrats welcomed German visitors into their private estates. They invited them to dinners and social weekends. They entertained them in quiet countryside homes. These gatherings were presented as polite hospitality, but conversations often drifted into politics. Some of the hosts enjoyed showing off their influence by speaking with foreign guests. Others enjoyed the attention that came from being treated as important figures. A few even believed that open discussion might reduce the risk of war. What they did not realize was that these moments were being misunderstood by powerful men inside Germany. This did not mean that the British government supported Hitler. The government was seriously preparing for war and making strong moves to resist German aggression. Yet the presence of these private conversations created a hidden problem. A small group of influential families was expressing personal ideas in ways that could appear suspicious. They were not acting under government guidance. They were not following official rules. They were simply engaging in social activities. Yet in a time of rising fear and tension, even harmless gestures could create confusion. Germany noticed the mixed messages. Some German figures began to believe that there were important people inside Britain who wanted peace on Germany's terms and were willing to work behind Churchill's back. For Rudolf Hess, these impressions grew stronger because of the influence of his mentor, Karl Haushofer. Haushofer studied foreign cultures and wrote about political influence. He looked at the British social world and misread polite behavior as open political interest. When British aristocrats treated German visitors with warmth and curiosity, he took this as a sign of deep sympathy. Haushofer believed that certain families inside Britain were willing to shape the future of Europe through quiet talks. He passed these ideas to Hess. Because Hess trusted him deeply, these beliefs began to form the foundation of Hess's worldview. Hess did not understand that British upper-class hospitality often masked confusion, disagreement, and personal pride rather than firm political commitment. To Hess, every friendly conversation looked like a secret promise. Every invitation looked like encouragement. This dangerous misunderstanding created a shadowy world where harmless talk and careless diplomacy blended together. In this world, Hess convinced himself that a secret peace movement existed inside Britain. He believed that powerful families wanted to negotiate. He believed that these individuals would welcome him if he dared to arrive with a plan. Researchers who later reviewed the records saw how these mixed signals built up in Hess's mind. They saw how they strengthened his belief that he could fly across enemy territory and start a peace discussion that would reshape the war. But to understand why Hess clung to this belief so strongly, we must first look at what happened after he was captured, and how Britain managed the man who insisted his mission had support on both sides. The mind Britain tried to break or control. Right after Hess was taken into custody, the British authorities placed him under tight psychological supervision. The official explanation said they needed to study his mental condition in order to understand why he had taken such a reckless and dangerous flight.
The Deputy Führer was dressed as a Luftwaffe flight lieutenant. Despite being forbidden by Hitler to fly, Hess had secretly been honing his long-distance flying skills.
At first, this sounded reasonable. But as the days passed, the situation around him started to look less like medical care and more like a form of carefully designed isolation. Hess was cut off from real information about the war. He was denied access to newspapers. He had very limited contact with anyone other than selected officials who reported directly to the government. He received treatments that raised questions among later researchers who examined his files. Reports described how Hess was given strange sedatives and injections. These were offered without clear explanations about their purpose or effects. Some researchers believe that these treatments were experimental compounds that appeared during wartime research. Others believe they were ordinary medical treatments. The truth remains uncertain. But what is clear is the impact they had on Hess. His letters became disorganized. His thoughts appeared broken and scattered. His memory grew weaker. Hess began speaking about attempts to poison him. He talked about secret plots. These signs could have come from stress, fear, or confusion. They could have come from the constant isolation. They could have come from side effects of his medications. No one could fully explain the cause. The most disturbing part of this period was not the possibility that Hess was losing his stability. It was the way officials reacted to his instability. Instead of helping him clarify his memories, they used his condition to dismiss anything he said that could create political trouble. When Hess talked about people he believed he had contact with inside Britain, officials said these were fantasies. When he mentioned earlier discussions involving aristocrats, the statements were removed from official files. When he repeated his story about peace proposals, the government claimed it was the confused talk of a man who no longer longer understood reality. This raised questions that still remain unanswered. Some people believe Hess truly lost his grip under the pressure of isolation. Others believe he was slowly pushed toward confusion, so he could no longer speak clearly about his earlier contacts. It is impossible to know which explanation is correct, but what can be seen is the result. His ability to explain what led him to take his dangerous flight was weakened. His story became easier for officials to dismiss. These developments set the next stage of his life. He would spend decades in imprisonment, trapped in a place where the line between truth and illusion became harder and harder to see. The prisoner who became a phantom. After the Nuremberg trials in 1946, where all the then-living senior Nazi top officials, most notably Hermann Göring and Hess himself, were convicted, Hess was sent to Spandau prison. Spandau was a facility built to hold many prisoners. Yet over time, Hess became its only inmate. For decades, he lived alone inside a complex designed for dozens of people. The prison was under the strict supervision of the Allied powers. Officers rotated in shifts, and every procedure was followed with almost ritual-like precision. Nothing about his daily life was left to chance. Visitors who saw him described an old, frail man. Yet reports also noted inconsistencies. Some mentioned that scars on his body appeared different than expected. Others noted strange changes in his posture or conflicting medical details. These small irregularities led to whispers that the man inside Spandau might not have been Hess at all. Some theorists argued that an imposter had been used at certain times to maintain the appearance of continuous imprisonment. Others thought these inconsistencies were only the result of age, illness, or decades of living in isolation. Access to Hess was extremely limited. Every movement, every conversation, and every letter was monitored and controlled with unusual care. His correspondence was carefully censored. His daily life left almost no chance for private, unfiltered contact. For a man who the world had long assumed knew nothing important, the level of control around him was extraordinary. Scholars who later studied the prison logs concluded that Hess's confinement was not just about punishment. It appeared designed to protect sensitive information that could have embarrassed governments or exposed reckless private diplomacy that had taken place decades earlier. And as Hess aged into his 80s, the questions about his confinement only became sharper. Why did four nations continue to enforce such strict oversight over a man the world had long written off as insane? What knowledge did he possess that required decades of such careful, almost obsessive control? These questions grew more urgent and troubling after the final event that ended his life, and raised even more doubts. The death that triggered the shocking 2025 discovery. Rudolf Hess died in 1987 under circumstances that were strange and immediately raised questions. Officially, authorities declared that he had committed suicide by hanging. On the surface, the report seemed simple and even plausible. Yet from the very beginning, the details surrounding his death did not quite add up. Eyewitness accounts and later examinations highlighted injuries that did not fit the story of self-hanging. Some wounds suggested a struggle or interference, though no definitive evidence could confirm what had really happened. Small observations, almost dismissed at the time, became more disturbing in retrospect. Guards reported that strange visitors had appeared at the prison in the days leading up to Hess's death. These individuals were never formally recorded or identified, yet their sudden presence added a layer of unease. The shed where Hess was found dead was cleared with extraordinary speed, almost as if someone wanted to erase every trace of what had happened before anyone could investigate thoroughly. Some guards privately claimed that the door to the shed had been locked from the outside, a chilling detail that raised the possibility Hess had not acted alone. For decades, these anomalies were brushed aside as speculation. Many assumed that people were simply exaggerating, or that the strange details were a product of rumor and fear surrounding one of the most infamous figures of the Nazi regime. Yet historians and investigators who followed the story closely knew the truth could be far darker. Hess's death had always felt like the final mysterious note in a story full of secrets. But everything shifted in 2025, nearly 4 decades after Hess's death, when a long-sealed British archive was finally opened. Known unofficially as the Black Garden Files, this collection had been hidden from public and scholarly view for generations. When the documents were revealed, the full scope of what officials had feared became clear, and it was far more unsettling than anyone had imagined. Inside were letters, coded messages, and private correspondence from pre-war aristocrats. There were detailed records showing that Hess's flight to Britain had not been a blind, desperate gamble, but had been influenced by signals from within Britain. These were not government communications. They were subtle gestures and encouragement from individuals who believed they could shape a secret negotiation for peace. Hess had interpreted these signals as a green light, as proof that certain factions within Britain were willing to entertain his dangerous plan. The files also revealed conversations within intelligence circles that were chilling in their clarity. Officials repeatedly described Hess as a carrier of sensitive information, not a deluded man. They debated how to control him, how to monitor his communication, and how to prevent him from speaking freely. There was explicit fear that if he did reveal what he knew, it could embarrass powerful families, expose reckless private diplomacy, and disrupt post-war political stability. Hess's confinement for decades, the strict control over every letter, every conversation, and every visit, was not merely punishment or security. It was a containment of knowledge that could have rewritten parts of history. The documents shed unprecedented light on the secret world of pre-war British aristocracy. They confirmed that private individuals had indeed engaged in unofficial diplomacy, quietly meeting German contacts and sending Hess subtle signals. Some had entertained him personally, some had communicated through letters or private gestures. What Hess saw in these interactions, polite conversation, invitations, or social curiosity, he interpreted as active encouragement for a peace mission. The Black Garden files make clear that his belief in a peace faction inside Britain was not entirely imagined. It was based on real, albeit carefully hidden signals that the average observer would never have noticed. The Hess case, once explained away as madness, is now a chilling warning. It reveals the immense power of private influence, the dangers of secret diplomacy, and the extreme risks that come from unguarded political flirting among elites. With the Black Garden files unsealed, we see that Europe's trajectory could have been shaped not only by official decisions and military campaigns, but also by private gestures, whispers in drawing rooms, and carefully hidden signals that few noticed at the time. The story of Hess is not just about delusion or reckless ambition. It is a story that shocks because it shows how fragile the public narrative of history can be. It also shows how close the continent came to a path determined by hidden hands rather than open governments, and how one man's dangerous hope for negotiation intersected with decades of secrets, surveillance, and manipulation. This is the dark, unsettling truth that finally emerges when the shadows around Hess are lifted, and it is a truth that continues to send chills through anyone who studies it, decades after the man himself disappeared.